You're listening to the Piano Parent Podcast with Shelley Davis. This is an encore presentation of episode 143. Good morning, piano parents. Thank you for tuning in to the show today, and thank you for continuing to be a subscriber. If you have noticed that my episodes are not coming out as regularly as they have in years past. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail right now, just to say that things have been pretty turbulent in my household. I will say that it has to do with my husband's health. He's doing better, and we're working through it together, but anything other than family life and helping take care of him and immediate work needs, anything else has gone onto the back burner, and I apologize for that. And so I'm grateful if you're listening and you have been here for a while and you're sticking with me. Thank you. There are better days ahead, and I appreciate your support. I wanted to share an encore episode because I wanted to let you know I'm still kicking and I do still want to continue the podcast. I'm not able to record a new episode, but in honor of Mr. Fred Rogers' birthday, which is on March the 20th, this year he would have been 96 years old. 96 years old. In honor of his birthday, I'm replaying an episode that originally aired in May of 2019, almost 5 years ago. I listened to that episode again in anticipation of sharing it with you, and there's just something calming about Mr. Rogers. And I may go, after I broadcast this encore episode, I may go treat myself to an episode or two of his show. It's nice for me to be reminded about some of the wonderful things that he said, some of the great ways that he taught children and can encourage us as parents and in how we interact with our children. It's a great reminder for me and how I interact. Even when I am stressed out, then I can give myself permission to take a breath and regroup and press on. So I hope you'll enjoy this encore presentation of episode 143. You're listening to the Piano Parent Podcast with Shelley Davis, episode 143. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Piano Parent Podcast, a weekly show designed especially for parents who are trying to help their piano kids make the most of piano lessons. My name is Shelley Davis, and I hold firmly to this lovely quote by fellow music educator Cheryl Lavender. She says, "The fact that children can make beautiful music is less significant than the fact that music can make beautiful children." Music certainly can make your child into a beautiful person, and you, being the most important person in your child's life, have a front row seat. My goal with this podcast is to help you and your piano kid make stronger connections with each other as you survive the emotional ups and downs of piano study. Thank you for listening. I'm glad you're here. Good morning, neighbor. Yes, I usually say good morning, piano parents, but considering the topic of this week's episode, I thought neighbor might be a more appropriate way of greeting you. I'm very glad you're here, and I am excited to share this specially dedicated episode with you today. You know, if you've been a longtime listener, you already know that every 10th episode, I share a list of 10 somethings. And there have been other kind of special and unique episodes that I've shared in the past. Episode 113 was pretty special because I was able to interview Annette Morgan. Miss Morgan was a student of Mrs. Clyburn, who was Van Cliburn's mother and also his piano teacher. And she had some unique, interesting things to share about her journey as a musician, being a student of Miss Clyburn, as well as her own personal interactions with Mr. Van Cliburn. So if you haven't listened to that episode, I'll have a link to it in today's show notes. Also, in episode 62, I just, for the fun of it, featured the wit and wisdom of Mr. Miyagi from the Karate Kid, the original Karate Kid movie from 1984. Also, episode 88 was all about the piano, of course. You can't have number 88 go by without talking about the piano, which features 88 piano keys. So today, episode 143, as soon as I learned about what 143 meant to the person I'm going to be talking about today, I knew that when we got to episode 143, I wanted to dedicate this episode to him. And if you've already looked at the title in your podcast player, you know that 143 was Mr. Rogers' code for I love you. I learned about that code, 143, representing I love you, last year when I saw the documentary about Mr. Rogers called Won't You Be My Neighbor? And I hope, if you haven't seen it already, I hope that you will check it out. I've already put it on my wish list for Amazon. I may just have to break down and buy it myself instead of waiting for the next holiday. But it got me to thinking, I wonder if you and your piano kid share any kind of code words or sort of a fun secret message that is just something the two of you share. I wonder if there are things in your family that maybe you as a group find funny, or you know the inside joke about that, but someone from the outside, it just wouldn't have the same meaning. It's not quite as funny to someone else because they don't know the backstory. We've got some things like that in our family, and I have to remind my kids, this might not be something you would want to share at school with your friends. They might not get our same sense of humor. Not that it's bad or anything like that. It's just something that's we think is funny, but someone else might not think so. My daughter, Tracy, when I drop her off at school or when we see each other kind of far away from each other, too far away to speak to each other, but we want to recognize and acknowledge each other, we'll do the American Sign Language symbol for I love you, where your thumb is pointing out, your index finger is pointing up, and also your pinky. Those three fingers sticking up, the American Sign Language symbol for I love you. It's just a quick little hand gesture that lets me know we're on the same team. And I see you, Tracy, you see me, and yes, we're together, and it's just kind of our special little bond. This is not exactly along the same lines, but when I was younger, my mid-teenage years, there was a situation at our church where this boy, I don't know if he really liked me all that much, but he would invite me after church to go to the local hangout. And I didn't really like him like that, and I didn't want to go with him or to whatever this other thing was. So I would tell him, well, let me ask my dad. And he would come with me when I asked my father. And my father's, oh, sure, that sounds like fun. Yeah, y'all have a good time, be home by whatever. And I should have been brave enough within my own person to say, no, I don't want to do that. But I was worried about hurting his feelings, and I wasn't completely confident with myself. So I told my dad about this later on. I said, Dad, I really don't want to go these places with him, but when I tell him that I'm going to ask you, he comes with me, and so I can't tell you that I don't want to go. And he said, oh, okay, let's work out a secret code. Whenever you don't want to go to whatever it is that he's asking you about, come to me and say, Dad, can I go with so-and-so to whatever place? Because I never call my father Dad. He's Daddy. And so it would be unusual for me to say Dad. And when I would say it that way, then he would know, okay, she doesn't really want to do this thing, so I'm going to be the bad guy, and I'll say no. I'm disappointed that we never actually got to put that plan into action. It was such a great plan. Dad, can I go with him to this thing? And no, I'm sorry. I need you to come on home with us. So there may be something in your family that's just kind of special, whether it's a way for you to play bad cop and help your child out of a jam, or a sign of affection, or just an inside joke. I thought it was interesting when I watched the documentary last year about Mr. Rogers to learn the significance of 143 to him and his family. Of course, the 1 is for the word I, which has 1 letter, and 4 is for the word love, which has the 4 letters Love, and then 3 represents you, YOU. So 143 together is a way of saying I love you. And I don't know if he would sign the end of a note with 143, or if he would, maybe these days he might send a text message 143 if he were still alive. I don't know exactly the full context of how he would use that, but there's an interview of Mrs. Rogers when she went on the Jimmy Fallon show last year, and she talked about the 143 and the significance of that between her husband and their children and herself. And I'll have a link to that video in the show notes as well. This number meant so much to Mr. Rogers that he even wanted to keep his body weight at 143 pounds, which I think is quite a feat. I'm pretty impressed by that. I don't think I'm going to aim for that, but I can use the secret code idea. Okay, enough about that. Since this episode is dedicated to Mr. Rogers, let's go beyond the 143 and just talk a little bit more about the way he interacted with children. I think we parents can learn a lot from Mr. Rogers about how to interact with children. He would actually speak to the children as children. He would show curiosity himself, and he would explain things to the children. I watched several clips the other day as I was doing some research for this episode. One clip that I saw, he was going to meet the author and book illustrator Eric Carle. And when he met Mr. Carl on the video, he introduced Mr. Carl to his television friend. And so Mr. Carl would wave to the television and, "Hi, friend, it's nice to meet you." And just a way of including the audience, whoever was watching on television. And he would explain things in a way that children would understand. And he would ask questions, probably the same questions that a child would be wondering, but maybe a child would be too afraid to ask, or of course watching on television, they didn't have that interaction, and so Mr. Rogers would ask those questions for the child. I think a lot of times as parents, we can tip one direction or another when we're dealing with children. Either one, we don't give them enough information and we just expect them to go along with whatever. We know what the plan is, and we either don't think they care or don't think they notice, or we just expect them to just come right along. And sometimes a child is going to be confused by that, and they're going to resist, and we're going to have more conflict on our hands than we would want to deal with. And so I like the idea that Mr. Rogers, when he would move from one part of the set or one thing to the next, he would explain and say what's going on. We're going to go and visit this friend, or let's move on to the front porch and we'll do this other thing. He was really good about letting children know what to expect. But he didn't go overboard. I think another problem with parents is maybe sometimes we explain too much. We think that a child has all of these questions, and so we feel like we need to explain every detail, and sometimes we can overwhelm our children with too many facts. There was a question not too long ago on one of the piano teacher forums about a child. And sadly, it's kind of a common topic in our day. A child had come to their studio and said, "What would we do if there were an active shooter here?" And the studio was in the teacher's home, and it was just kind of took the teacher by surprise. It wasn't something that she had considered. And so she was asking the other teachers in the group, "What do you do? What would your answer be with this child?" My answer with this child would be to ask them, what do you think we should do? What do you think would be a good idea to make us safe? And the reason that I would ask that question is to, first of all, that would inform me more about what really is going on in the child's mind. Maybe they had a drill at school, and so now the student is still processing that information. We practiced this thing at school. I'm not at school anymore, but I wonder what would happen. It's possible that they're not really in fear that that's actually going to happen. They're just curious. They learned this new information and they're wanting to apply it in a different situation. So by asking the child, what do you think we should do? Then I can be more careful not to overload them with too much information. At the same time, I don't want to dismiss them and say, oh, that's never going to happen here. We don't have to worry about that at all. I don't want to neglect a child's feelings or thoughts, but I don't want to go into too much detail or overload them with too much information. So even though I loved watching Mr. Rogers when I was a child, and when I go back and watch videos even now, I'm mesmerized and I'm just really captivated by the things that he shares and the things that he talks about. More than being a childlike audience member, I'm also studying his interactions with children to learn what I can do with my own children and with my students. One of the clips that I saw the other day when I was working so hard to research this for you, I just had to watch video after video after video. The things that I will do for you. Okay. One of the clips that I saw was when Mr. Rogers went to a music shop and he got to meet a person playing a glass harmonica, which was an invention of Benjamin Franklin. And they brought that out in the video clip. And I'll have a link to that in the show notes that you might enjoy watching that with your piano kid. I loved everything about that interview and seeing Mr. Rogers interact with the musician who played the glass harmonica. And they talked about how you have to be careful with the clean fingers and then dip your fingers in water and, all the questions that Mr. Rogers asked, and it was just so engaging. And I think it lets children know it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to be curious, and it's smart to be safe and responsible and listen. And then there was another harmonica next to the one that they were first talking about. And so Mr. Rogers had a chance to sit down and try it. And even though he is a musician, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, he had some trouble getting the glass to make a sound. And it was just kind of interesting how he didn't get frustrated. And I think it's a good lesson for children that when you first try something, maybe it won't work the first time you try. And keep trying and recognize that something's difficult. It's okay for it to be difficult, but that doesn't mean we quit and give up. And he complimented the original musician. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name at the moment, but he complimented and said, you must have had to practice a lot to be able to play this. And anyway, I go watch the video. It was really, really interesting. As I alluded to, Mr. Rogers, not only was he a wonderful TV host, that's probably what we think of him most as, is the host and the man, the kind, gentle, peaceful man that hosted Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood all of those years when most of us were growing up. If you're from a generation past that, I think Mr. Rogers still recorded until the late 90s. But if you're beyond that time, I've got good news for you. The Mr. Rogers Foundation has a wonderful website, and that's where I got a lot of my information for today's episode and where I found a lot of the clips. So I will have a link to their website in the show notes, but it's simply mrrogers.org. And Mr. is spelled out, MISTERROGERS.org. It's a wonderful website that has all kinds of great information, lots of videos. They post, they have a schedule where the first Monday of each month, they post some of the very early episodes from the 1960s and early 70s. And then on the third Monday of each month, they'll post episodes from themes that were in the late 70s and 80s. They would have a theme week, maybe about feelings or about when a baby comes to join your family or going to school or going to the dentist. They will trade out the videos for other videos, other episodes that were based more on a theme. When I had seen that documentary last year, Won't You Be My Neighbor, I learned that Mr. Rogers actually studied music composition in college. That's what he has his bachelor's degree in. He also studied psychology for children and child development and those things, but he considered himself, above all, a composer. He wrote more than 200 songs for the show. And he used those songs to help convey emotions that children might feel. He used music as a way of, as a bit of psychology for children. Some of the song titles include There Are Many Ways to Say I Love You, What Do You Do with the Mad You Feel, Some Things I Don't Understand, Good Feeling, and I'm Proud of You. And if you go to that website, mrrogers.org, you can watch video clips of these different songs. What I didn't remember from the documentary from last year, but what I did learn by looking at the website was that his wife, Joanne, also studied music at Rollins College. That's where they met. And Joanne was a concert pianist herself. On that Mr. Rogers Neighborhood website, there's a clip when his whole family came to visit the set, and he introduced his two sons and his wife, and he and Joanne sit down at the piano together and play a duet while the family sings. I had never seen that before. I don't remember if I would have watched that episode when I was a child, but it was such a treat to see it now, to see him interacting with his wife, to see them playing the piano together. So I thank you so much for giving me an excuse to spend the whole afternoon, quote unquote, researching. There was another clip where he introduced the musicians that played for every episode. You may have already known this, but I didn't realize that the music on the show was played live in the moment. Now that I know that and I go back and watch videos, it makes sense. But I didn't catch that at first. So there was one clip, and again, you can find it on the Mr. Rogers website, where he actually kind of broke the fourth wall, and he walked off of what we normally see, the living room set. He walked off and he walked to the area where the musicians were. He introduced the children, the viewers, to Johnny Costa, the pianist that played for all of those episodes. He also introduced them to Carl McVicker, who was the bass player, and Bobby Rawsthorne, who played percussion. The three of them together made up the Costa Trio. And you can read more about each of them and see different video clips back on the website. This sounds like a commercial for that website, and I'm sorry about that. Maybe I'm not so sorry about it. I was just thrilled to find all of this information because the type of TV that they produced, the type of shows that Mr. Rogers produced, whether you're a fan or not, it's clear that I am a fan and was when I was a child, but it's different from things that we watch these days. Even the animation, the live action, a lot of the things that we'll watch on some of the children's programming is just so elementary and so busy and rather shallow. I don't know of anything else that is produced these days that is the same caliber as what Mr. Rogers had on his show. And he was very intentional about the things that he produced on his show. He was very intentional about the things that he spoke about. He was very intentional about being slow and calm and peaceful. He said in his interview with the Senate committee, and you may know all about that, where he was speaking on behalf of funding for public television. He said, you don't have to whack someone on the head to get the attention of a child. He wanted to be intentional and engaging with the way he interacted with children, and he knew that that didn't have to happen through a lot of wild and loud movement, that it could be done in a calm, quiet, peaceful manner. There's a quote from last year's documentary where Mr. Rogers is sitting at the piano, and this may have been the first time that I realized he was a musician. He was a composer. But he says, come on over a minute. I just had some ideas that I've been thinking about for quite a while about modulation. It seems to me that there are different themes in life, and one of my main jobs, it seems to me, is to help through the mass media for children, to help children through some of the difficult modulations of life. And as a musician, understanding modulation and transitions and themes, I loved that he was speaking two of my languages at once. He was speaking to me through the language of music and also the language of children. I'm told that when you produce a podcast, you're supposed to be answering a question. What is the question that we would answer in this episode? I don't know that I've really asked a question. Maybe I've hoped to share some interesting information, what I think is interesting information. And it all started with the fact that this is episode 143 and Mr. Rogers' connection with making 143 represent I love you. And then that brought me through a whole rabbit trail of childhood memories and reminiscing about the things that I learned from Mr. Rogers watching it as a child. And then now, as a parent and a teacher, the things that I want to learn from the teacher that was Mr. Rogers, not just the child-friendly television host. So if you haven't seen that documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor? I very much encourage you to please check it out. I think you can order the DVD off of Amazon. I've added that to my wish list. It's one of the top grossing documentaries, one of the top 15 grossing documentaries in U.S. history. It grossed $22.6 million last year. And I'm looking forward to another movie that's coming out later in the fall of 2019, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. This one's not going to be a documentary. It's not a biopic or anything like that, but it is based on the true story of the real-life friendship that developed between Mr. Fred Rogers and journalist Tom Junod. The film is set to feature Tom Hanks, who is another one of my favorite actors, and so I'm looking forward to that movie coming out later this year. But if you're interested in some of the ways that Mr. Rogers interacted with people, I would like to recommend a book to you. It's called The Simple Faith of Mr. Rogers, written by Amy Hollingsworth. She also was a journalist who met Mr. Rogers through an interview, but as a result of that interview, they became very good friends, and the book details years and years of letters that they would write back and forth to each other. And I just think that, especially in this day and age, I think that is such an interesting, amazing thing that a busy man like Mr. Rogers, and I'm sure Miss Hollingsworth is a busy woman, but that they would take the time to write to each other and develop this relationship out of what could have been just a one-time meeting. So I may not have answered any questions, but I hope I have given you some inspiration. And if you choose to share any of this with your piano kid, there are lots of short clips on the Mr. Rogers website, mrrogers.org, where he goes to meet different musicians and see, he takes you on tours of different factories to see how things are made. And if you watched Mr. Rogers as a child, then it would be kind of fun for you to walk down memory lane and then share this experience with your piano kid. My dad often says that one of the reasons that so many people enjoy Christmas, and one of the reasons why it's the most wonderful time of the year, is because people finally start acting the way God intends for us to act all of the time. We start seeing the joy through a child's eyes. We think of others. We think of the gifts that we would like to share with other people. We intentionally spend time with family. We make time to spend with others. We're more generous. We volunteer. We do all of these things. We seem to be able to do them at Christmas time, but it would be wonderful if we could do it all year long. And I think the same thing is true about Mr. Rogers. I think one of the things that I admire about him is that he seemed to live his life, whether his personal life, his professional life, he lived in a way that I think we should all strive for in our daily interactions with our own children, with other people that we meet, to be calm and peaceful and understanding and curious and expressing our feelings and allowing other people to express theirs. It seems to me that Mr. Rogers is the epitome, the prime example of the way we should all strive to live our lives. To close out this episode, I want to share one last quote, and this is from Mr. Rogers' final commencement speech he delivered to Dartmouth College in 2002 before he passed away in 2003. And he says, "From the time you were very little, you've had people who have smiled you into smiling, people who have talked you into talking, sung you into singing, loved you into loving." As parents, we have that responsibility to engage our children and invite them into conversation. And I hope this episode has given you a little more confidence and a little more recognition of how valuable you are to the people in your life. Thank you, Mr. Rogers, and thank you all for listening. I hope you'll come back next week and listen in when I will share a teacher interview with you. And this teacher is almost my own Mr. Rogers. She is a wonderful, compassionate, gentle lady who is very warm and welcoming. And I hope you'll come back and listen to my interview with my good friend, Judy Wilkins. I'll see you next week. This episode is brought to you by the Piano Parents Summer Survival Kit. The end of the school year and summer break is just around the corner, and with the excitement of a change of pace comes the reality that your piano kid is going to have more free time on their hands. Rather than just telling them to go practice the piano, I've created a free resource for you to use that has fun and creative ways to help them stay engaged with their music and playing the piano this summer. The Piano Parent Summer Survival Kit mini ebook offers a variety of activities to keep your piano momentum progressing forward. There are things for your piano kid to do independently, as well as suggestions for activities your whole family can do together. And when you complete these activities and want more, there's information at the end of the book about purchasing the full version that contains even more musical activities. You'll find a request form at the bottom of the show notes for this episode. Just fill in your name and email address, and I'll send the free Piano Parent Summer Survival Kit mini ebook right to your email inbox. As always, thanks for listening, and thanks for sending the show to your friends. And I look forward to seeing you next week.